Right, so the US administration of tangerine-tinged toddler tantrum thrower Donald Trump stands at risk of economic calamity should it go to war with Iran for the sake of Israel. Because war between the two states might not be a conventional one. It might end up being more of an economic conflict that might have catastrophic consequences for the American economy. The prospect of war with Iran, driven largely by Israeli security concerns rather than any genuine US national interests, is one of the most significant geopolitical threats facing America today, as the rhetoric between both nations seems to keep on escalating. And to what end? At the heart of this apparently looming confrontation lies the fundamental imbalance of the US-Israel relationship, because whilst Israel consistently acts in its own national interests at the expense of everyone else around them, as that is, the United States continues to provide unconditional military, diplomatic and financial support, and the US public can see it. So we've got a situation here where Israeli security concerns effectively dictate US foreign policy in the Middle East, even when those policies run counter to American economic interests, even to the extent it could trigger a wider war. It is insane, and for as much as US citizens might be distanced from conventional warfare, economic warfare could come crashing down right on their doorsteps. And are they really prepared to see their economy crash for the sake of Israel? Right, so a US-Iran conflict, the sort of thing Benjamin Netanyahu dreams of, if allowed to occur, and the rhetoric is getting ever increasingly concerning, would likely have devastating consequences for the American economy. You see, unlike conventional wars fought on distant battlefields from the white picket fences of the stereotypical American family living the American dream, and for as much as media headlines talk up the case of Iran's alleged nuclear capabilities, which a recent US report has actually rubbished, Iran has developed methods specifically designed to target economic vulnerabilities. Iran know the average US citizen is watching war their nation is involved in, know it is nowhere near them, and as appalled as they might be about it, they aren't necessarily directly impacted. Hit the US economy, though, that changes. With the US economy already showing signs of fragility, including soaring national debt, persistent inflation, and the like, what could be the consequences of Iran hitting that too, I wonder? And for what reason? Israel? What do they do for you in America apart from beg for more weapons, beg for more money, beg for more aid, and getting it, but often at your expense? There's obviously a lot of bad blood between the US and Iran going back decades. That's not something I want to go into. But decades of broken promises and hostile actions has put both at serious loggerheads now. And this is getting worse and worse. The matter of Israel and the destabilization of the Middle East, the US's ardent and unapologetic support for Israel in spite of all of that versus Iran's so-called axis of resistance, largely supporting Palestine. Israel has an outsized role in shaping American policy towards Iran, you see, pushing for more confrontational approaches to serve Israeli security interests rather than anything that could be described as US strategic goals. The Israel lobby is arguably nowhere more pervasive than in the US, and this can include government-to-government relations, the Miriam Adelson-type Zionist donors and their influence, the pro-Israel lobby in Washington, AIPAC, and sympathetic think tanks that shape policy discourse, acting as if they're some sort of impartial voice when they absolutely aren't. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been particularly vocal in his warnings about the Iranian nuclear threat. They've got nuclear weapons. Whoa! Going so far as to present a cartoonish diagram of a bomb at the United Nations in 2012 to illustrate his claims about Iran's nuclear program. These alarmist warnings have continued despite consistent assessments from US intelligence agencies that Iran is not actively pursuing nuclear weapons development. A quote on this from the annual Threat Assessment Intelligence Report published by the US as reported by the Cradle, reading, "The annual US Intelligence Threat Assessment Report published on 25th of March says Iran is not currently building a nuclear weapon, according to a copy of the document reviewed by Reuters. The IC, intelligence community, continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003, the report reveals. Khamenei put a fatwa in place that forbids Iran from developing nuclear weapons. But the result of all of this influence is a US policy towards Iran that is disconnected from anything like reality. Despite the absence of evidence that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, the threat of military action remains on the table because Israel says so. Therefore, the justification for military action against Iran rests on very shaky foundations. The primary argument, this nuclear threat, being directly contradicted by the US's own intelligence assessments. So where will that leave the cheerleaders of this move now then? Well, the argument that Iran is destabilising the region is another common refrain, isn't it? And it too similarly fails to account for the role of Israel and Israeli actions in creating regional stability, none more so than the genocide Israel is perpetrating in Gaza right now. Even the recent attacks on shipping in the Red Sea by the Houthis, frequently attributed to Iranian influence as that is, though the Houthis increasingly protest their own independence about that. Yet the US would rather attack them than deal with Israel breaking international law. And of course all attacks on Yemen get attributed to Iran again, and by attacking Yemen they claim to be attacking Iran, taking it to Iran, giving Iran a bloody nose. Woo. Not really though, are they? So with the nuclear argument debunked and other justifications proving equally hollow, the case for war with Iran appears to rest primarily on some sort of ideological commitment to maintaining US support for Israeli dominance come what may in the region, rather than any genuine threat or anything of that kind to American security. This doesn't reduce the risk of conflict at all. But what shape that conflict takes is another matter entirely. And where the US might be seen to be the sort to go in all gung-ho, all guns blazing should it come to that, Iran, it seems, they have other options. And the US economy might be the most effective target they could aim for. Iran's most potent economic weapon is its ability to disrupt global oil supplies. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes daily, represents the most vulnerable choke point in global energy markets, given that Iran border it completely from the east. Iranian officials have explicitly warned that if US sanctions prevent Iran from exporting its oil, they will ensure no other regional producers can either, saying, if we can't sell our oil, then no one's going to sell their oil. The most immediate threat comes from potential oil price shocks, therefore. Despite increased domestic production in the US, America remains deeply integrated in global energy markets. A sustained price spike above $150 a barrel, well within the realms of possibility if Iran threats materialise. That would likely push inflation back to crisis levels. The Federal Reserve would face an impossible choice between raising interest rates to combat inflation, crushing an already weak American economy, or allowing prices to spiral out of control. The banking sector represents another vulnerability. The 2023 collapse of several regional banks revealed systemic weaknesses in the financial system. A combination of cyber attacks on financial institutions and broader economic uncertainty could trigger runs on the banks. Attacks on shipping in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea would force longer, more expensive transportation routes to continue, on top of the ones that are already having to be forked out for, in addition to those being caused already by the Houthis and their blockade of the Red Sea. These are all options open to Iran. They're all vulnerabilities to create a situation where Iran could inflict severe economic damage without ever directly attacking the US homeland and without a single rocket being fired. By targeting critical aspects of the global economic system, Tehran could bring the consequences of war directly to American consumers in the form of skyrocketing prices, financial instability, job losses, on top of all of those already being caused by Trump, all by his big orange self. Of course, that doesn't rule out the potential for more conventional warfare in addition to economic strikes that would hit US consumers. Unlike relatively contained conflicts like Iraq or Afghanistan, conflict with Iran would more likely draw in multiple regional actors, those entities that get referred to as proxies most often, the axis of resistance. Israel will almost certainly face further rocket barrages from Hezbollah in Lebanon, on top of those being fired now due to the resumption of their Gaza genocide, whilst Gulf states hosting US bases like Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, they might experience retaliatory strikes targeting those US assets. With no evidence Iran is developing nuclear weapons and no plausible path to regime change that wouldn't create chaos worse than the current situation, military action offers no discernible benefits to the US. Not to the Middle East either. In fact, the only person who would benefit from it would be Benjamin Netanyahu, who would be absolutely delighted. He'd literally be the only beneficiary. The idea that the US should risk economic catastrophe, I'll get my words out in a minute, to satisfy Israeli security concerns is just insane. And more people, not least Americans themselves, need to come to this realization. Ultimately, avoiding war with Iran isn't just about preventing human suffering or upholding international law. Obviously, they're important. But it's about protecting the American economy from a self-inflicted catastrophe that could make the COVID downturn look mild by comparison. The United States can't afford another disastrous Middle East war. And if it insists on engaging in one, as powerful as the US is, economically, might come off worse. It isn't just in the US where Israeli rhetoric can be driving a nation to calamity either. It's also happening in Israel itself. Netanyahu potentially triggering nothing less than civil war, would you believe? Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel, which is very much appreciated. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.